All right, I am finally going to do this. I've been putting it off for a long time. I'm going to tell my life story as a Jehovah's Witness. I don't really have any notes. It's pretty much just going to be me speaking verbatim on, my life. I have a pretty good photographic memory, and I can kind of think back to age 3 pretty well. And I'm trying to just tell what the important stories are to get things off my chest right away. I do not want to come across as anybody who wants to disrespect their family or my mother and father particularly. Both my mother and father are Jehovah's Witnesses and have been in it most of their lives. They are victims, and I have no animosity towards them. I love my mother and my father, and I love my family. I have to accept that they're in a cult, and I'm no longer. I used to be in one. Um, that being said, I don't want to come across as any kind of disrespect. They did the best they could with what they had, considering the circumstances. Both my parents did not have an easy upbringing in their life. Both come from farming communities and a very hard life to begin with, and then you know, being a Jehovah's Witness on top of that did not help. And so I wanted to get that out of the way. And this is not anybody who in my past who may watch this video. Um, be sure that I love you, and this is not. I don't have any ill will to people. And if people are kind of shocked by the way I kind of live my life, remember I am an ENTP and I am double pragmatic, and I lack the ability, like most sensors of the SJs or the SP temperament, to understand everything in this world, because this is a sensor world. You guys are the majority, and most things in this world do not make sense. And so, me breaking the rules of what other people would consider unethical or immoral, um, that doesn't make sense to me. And so, just kind of bring that to your mind. I don't have ill will towards people. I don't have strong feelings towards anything, really. Typically speaking, you guys like to call us autistic and crap and put us on pills and try to make us normal. It's just not going to work. Well, anyways, let me begin. I'll give you my family history in some ways. My grandmother got baptized. My grandmother got baptized when my mother was 4. So she was pretty much born in. Uh, she was a farmer's wife. Her husband, my grandfather, who I never knew, he died before I was born, um, was not a witness, but he was not opposed. The only issues that she dealt with was he was a very frugal man and didn't want to support trips to assemblies and things like that. And so I believe she did a lot of side work to afford to go to the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium, as my mother did go there as a girl. Um, just a little heads up, my parents are 78 years old. They had me at 43, and I'm what you call an accident. Okay, and so if it's the age range seems different, I'm 35 years old and my parents are 78. Okay, so you get an idea of how I was brought up. My siblings, my next of kin sibling, my brother Nate, um, he is 41, and then the next sibling up would be 49. Okay, just to give an idea, uh, and how I was raised. So my mother was raised in the truth. I shouldn't say truth, but she was raised as a witness. She got baptized at 14. At that time, she was able just to bring her bathing suit with her friend. There was no questions then, and they just got baptized in the Kingdom Hall. Um, she was later disfellowshipped. When she got pregnant, she was allowed to date because her worldly father had no problem with that, and she ended up getting married at 15. So my oldest brother is 62. Yeah, something like that. And so she was disfellowshipped at 16. Um, she doesn't talk about this very much. She's an ISFJ. The past is very painful to them, and they relive it very well. And so, yes, she was disfellowshipped at 16, and then got reinstated a couple of years later. And she was eventually was a single mother with 3 children on her own, working while also being a witness. My father was raised Southern Baptist in California. And so he was raised Baptist, and I believe around 26 years of age, he invited the Jehovah's Witnesses in because he was going to prove them wrong. And apparently, he learned more in 25 minutes than he did in 25 years. And so I think 2 years of studying on and off, because he had a drinking problem and a smoking problem. He eventually got baptized with his then wife. Then they had 5 kids, and she ended up leaving him, and he was raising the 5 children on his own. Um, and then he got married to my mother. I believe they were 36. Yeah. And they got married, so then they had the kids together. So that's 8 in one household. Um, and they tried to raise them as witnesses, but most of them were of age at that time and left. And then they had my brother, who's 6 years older than me, and then me at 43. And so that's kind of like a little rundown of my family history. My father was a roofing contractor, so I grew up around construction, like most witness kids do. My mother was a housewife. She did have some cleaning jobs she did for a little bit of extra money. We were not like in poverty, but we were poor for our peers because I grew up in Napa, and most of my friends had a lot more money than I did. And anything I wanted, I had to work for myself. Coming into my spiritual life, my father was never an elder, anything like that. The most he ever got was ministerial servant. He's currently a ministerial servant. He was a regular pioneer, and um, so I never had the luxury of having the elder father, bump me up and get me ahead. My mother never regular pioneered until later on in life. She'd regular pioneered with me when I did that. For the most part, she was at home, as a homemaker, and I had that there. Um, to begin with, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I have vague memories of Phoenix, Arizona, and the congregation there. I remember being on the stairs and not having any issues with the witnesses. We moved to California when I was 4, and this is one of the first times I got in trouble because I was talking with my cousin about oral sex, and my mother got really mad at me, and I remember she gave me an ultimatum, either getting spanked or a timeout, and I chose timeout to sit in the chair. I did not understand that these topics were not something you can't talk about. To me, it's like if something's okay to talk about on stage, why can't I talk about it as a child? So that was very confusing because you go to the meetings and you hear a man on this platform talking about oral sex, anal sex, masturbation, bestiality, all he wants. But kids can't talk about it at home because that's dirty. Okay. And so, as a child, obviously, like most witness kids, were sexualized to talk about these kind of things. Um, I had my first homosexual activity at 5 years of age uh, with a friend. It was just kind of fooling around underneath the bed. I mean, obviously, we're not old enough to do anything like that. Um, I knew then that I had. I'm looking back now. I can tell that obviously I knew I was gay then. Obviously, I was born gay. Uh, my best friend in Phoenix, Arizona, was a girl. We played Barbies together and things like that, and definitely was going that route. So I remember getting in trouble for that. And that wasn't the first time. That wasn't the only time. And then there was also continuation with other friends of fooling around in the bedroom and like slumber parties and things like that. It's quite a few people who are now straight, who were, engaging in this kind of stuff. So that was about 6. Um, about and I was always loving the Jehovah's Witness faith. When I was 9 years of age, I used to ride my bicycle to the Kingdom Hall to go on evening witnessing after school, and so I always had the desire to preach and to spread the message and to do that kind of thing. I always answered well and was had no problem raising my hand, and I love the attention I got from it. I was always well thought about because I was able to read really well. That was kind of like my thing, was reading all the hard names and no one really knowing how to do that. Uh, in school, uh, like most witness children, you kind of have like encouragement to do well, but then you kind of start figuring out that your parents don't really care. At least mine didn't. I did get some incentives for getting good grades, but my brother and I were in special classes, gifted and talented, if you know what that means. But we were dragged out of it because my father was afraid it would make us arrogant. Um, and so we kind of learned at an early age that it really didn't matter if we did well in school or not because we weren't going to college anyways. And so growing up as a witness, you kind of don't think that way. For most part, being a witness in school wasn't that big of a deal. During the holiday things, my mother would come and pick us up and take us to like the skate park. We'd go skateboarding or rollerblading or whatever, while they had their Halloween parties and Christmas parties. There was this one year in fifth grade, where I was getting teased a lot for not celebrating Christmas. I didn't know what to do, and I kind of kept calling in sick at school and getting home until I eventually, the principal asked me what was up, and I told him, and so that kid got in trouble, and it never happened again. So that was the gist of my bullying. For the most part, I've always been very popular in school. I always got like the funniest kid in class, and despite being a very sickly child, I I had a lot of friends in school, and so I didn't remember having like any kind of weird animosity. That being said, at school it was kind of like a double life, as I did cuss, I did say dirty jokes, and I wasn't trying to preach or anything like that. Um, I was pretty embarrassed about being a witness at school for the most part. I didn't like my popularity being affected by that. And so I kind of kept it to myself. A few kids did know, but they were my close friends, and so I never really had to deal with anything like that. In California, people having different religious beliefs is pretty common, and so there were other people who were non-witnesses who didn't celebrate Christmas or Halloween because they were maybe Muslim or Jewish, or just atheists or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I just remember it not being that big of a deal in California. Um, so, like I said, I used to go out in service and evening witnessing after school. I remember knocking on doors. I remember the first time getting yelled at the door. I was 9 years of age, and an old woman screamed at me and yelled at me and cussed me out. And so that adds to the persecution complex. Um, Skipping ahead, about 9 years of age, a new ministerial, I mean, I'm sorry, a new brother moved in who got baptized under the PO at the time. Um, he got baptized and he became a ministerial servant within a year, and he took a lot of interest in young kids in the congregation, and myself being included, and everyone my age, ages from ages 8 to 12. And long story short, he ended up being a pedophile. And he was like fucking a couple of kids in the congregation. I myself have no memory of anything like that, but to give a story about this guy, he would have boys over at his house, and he's single. It's like 38 years of age, and he was dating all the single sisters in the area. You know, I don't know if he's straight or gay or whatever he is. He's screwed up. How about that? That's a style. And and so anyways, I would share a bed with him, no problem. And I remember like the other kids, the other boys making fun of me because I didn't want to cuddle, and I remember that being weird. Like, I don't understand why they were cuddling with this man. And this dude he was a ministerial servant. He lived in what we call the mother-in-law unit, in California. So the elder who owned the big giant house, and he had a smaller house called a mother-in-law unit, which is like a two-bedroom house with a bathroom and a kitchen and everything. Lived in an apartment, and everyone knew we stayed there. And so picture like a grown man who's pushing 40, who sleeps in his underwear with two or three boys when sleepovers over at his house, and we're all in our underwear. I remember him letting us watch. I remember watching like Lawnmower Man, and I remember having like sexual feelings watching Lawnmower Man because it had a lot of sex scenes in it, and that's a rated R movie. And so this was like going on a regular basis, um, which is really weird looking back, especially since Napa had the really big pedophile scandal with a man named Villegas, who was molesting like tons and tons of girls. Then he got arrested. Then he got out of jail, got reinstated, and was molesting girls again. You can find links to this. I've seen it before in the Napa Valley Register, um, but sometimes they disappear, and Google's weird in their censorship. So that was a scandal going on in Napa. And so then I was sharing this bed with this guy who turned out to be a pedophile later on. I have no recollection of ever being touched. If he did something to me in my sleep, that's a possibility. I won't put that past it. Uh, but I remember everything really well. And so I don't think anything like that happened. He eventually left town, and although he did end up adopting one of the boys in the congregation who was 14, and he adopted him at 14, and he was having sex with him for like 6 years, and he's all screwed up now, and he came from like a foster family and stuff like that. But it's weird looking back to this now because the elders all knew that he would pick us up and take us home and bring us inside, and everyone's been in his apartment. He only had one bed, you know. It's only one bed, so where are the kids all sleeping? And no one cared, because he was a ministerial servant. And so it's just interesting to think back at that. Then my father got this fellowship at 11, I believe, for alcoholism, but he would never admit to what happened. And so that was when my life kind of changed a lot, because that was when things changed how they viewed me in the Kingdom Hall. Because I don't know if anybody ever can sympathize with me, but when you have a parent that's disfellowshipped, it kind of disfellowships the entire family. So my mom and my brother, and we're all affected by this because my dad's disfellowshipped, so he's shunned, and so that means kids can't come over and play because they can't be around my father, or I can't hang out with some kids because I might bring my father's influence on them. So these are little things that get brought into it. So middle school was kind of rough for me in that sense. I started getting really bad grades and not really caring about a lot of different things. Granted, no one was forcing me, and I knew I wasn't going to college anyway, so what did it matter? Uh, and so my brother got married at 15. Um, when I was 15, sorry. I was 15, he was 22, 21. And after that, I had to start hanging out with people my own age because I was hanging out with his friends mostly before that. And we did typical young people stuff. I remember them all dating, and like I was used as a chaperone for young witness dating, and I remember people just like groping and grabbing breasts and making out and all this kind of stuff, and you're just sitting there like a 12-year-old, chaperoning 16 and 17-year-old people dating or secret dating, and you're just like there. And as a young man, I mean, I remember my brother also told me to like, oh, scram, so I was like, okay, bye, and so you just walk away, and you're like, you're supposed to be chaperoning. Who knows what he did with his now current wife, but whatever. uh, they did get reproved like twice before getting married because idiotic things, I believe for like dry humping or something stupid, uh, something idiotic like that. And so when that happened, I ended up getting a really, really close friend, and we ended up having sex. And I was 15, and he was 15 as well. And so I had, that activity with him, and then with another friend, and actually another friend later on at 17. I remember in my mind thinking I can get baptized and everything will be okay after I get baptized. And I was thinking like, well, it sucks for him because he's already baptized, but he was an elder's son, and so it was kind of like okay or whatever. And so I remember getting baptized and thinking everything was okay, and then I wasn't going to have sex again but I ended up doing it anyways. Um, I'm not going to go into details what sex meant at that age. It was young and childlike, so I don't think super adult, but it definitely was pornea and what we consider fornication. And at that age, my parents let me have the internet in my bedroom, which was bizarre for a witness kid. So I had full on internet. Maybe it's because their age, I just didn't really know how a computer works. But no, like my friends would come over and we would just openly watch porn, and like nobody ever said anything. We're talking like hardcore. But by the time I was 16, I saw pretty much bestiality, brutality crap, anything you can think of on the internet for a 16-year-old to find. It was all readily available. I remember like the Faces of Death videos of watching people like get murdered and hit by trains and blown up and stuff like that. Um, I never really fit in too much with most of what my friends wanted to do. They mostly wanted to go date girls, obviously, and talk to people like that. And so, like the friend I was, sleeping with and fooling around with had a girlfriend too. So, uh, at the time, I didn't view it as anything gay. It was just kind of like fun. And because to me at that time, gayness was like men dating, holding hands, and kissing and being in love. And that wasn't the case. I mean, this stuff was in the dark, no one talking, you know, that type of stuff. What happened was one of my friends that I fooled around with started feeling guilty because he was trying to get baptized. And he told my brother on me. And so then my brother came to me and him and talked to me about it. And I was 17 at the time. And so that obviously had to be brought to the elders. And I was like, well, it's not just him. There's also this one and this one too. And so it was kind of like a big milestorm of gayness all in one elder body. And so the elder body had ended up privately reproving three of us, and one person obviously wasn't able to get baptized. So I was privately reproved at 17 for homosexuality. Um, but they had a marking talk on this, and so it was a marking talk about not allowing kids to have sleepovers anymore because modern influence is having them all act gay now. And so this obviously spread through all four congregations in the Napa Valley, and and so in the Napa Valley, and so like everybody knew about it, and so there was like all this rumors going around who's gay in the Silverado congregation, who's gay and things like that. Fortunately for me, during the marking talk, two boys didn't show up, and so people insinuated it was them, and so that kind of helped me with a lot of the rumors going around. But the PO, who wasn't even on my judicial committee, called up all people in the car and in the whole city who had children my age and told them not to associate with me because that was bad association. And so people started figuring some things out. Now, the funny thing about this is my father's disfellowshipped, and so I get treated a lot differently now because he didn't warn the other families about the elder sons, I should say. Okay, all the other three all had elders for fathers. Okay, and I'm like this black sheep with the evil disfellowship father, and so I was the only one they warned the other families about, and so the other sons all still had friends in the congregation, and so pretty much I was blamed for everything. Um, this was really hard in high school because at this time most of us went to this independent studies, home studies, where we went to class once a week and did our homework at home. And so I was constantly being interrogated and asked, "Oh, what did you do? Oh my God, I mean, do you like this?" I'm like, "Would you know, all this nonsense and stuff like that," and being constantly questioned. And again, I was always very popular and always had lots of friends, and so that kind of irritated me uh, to be shamed and humiliated and have like my dirty laundry in front of everybody. Um, it was kind of weird. After that, my whole friendship changed, and so my close friends became uh, a cousin that was never baptized, and another kid who was his father was not in the truth, and so he was not baptized either. And so my friends were kind of like the derelicts now at that point, the ones who weren't baptized, and that's kind of who I had to hang out with because of the soft shunning, even though I was just privately reproved. I remember at this time of my age where I was trying to do different like hairstyles and like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys was popular, and I remember when I had my hair like Nick Carter, and just getting a lot of harassment from the elders about just stupid shit. Um, just being nitpicked all the time as a youth. Um, Going through high school, I really, really enjoyed government class economics, which is typical for ENTPs. They get at those two things. I was really nice. I was in honors drama, and I really loved theater, and I was encouraged real heavily to go to, a university to focus on that. But obviously, I didn't do that. Uh, we'll skip ahead. At age 19, I moved out into my own apartment with two other witnesses. And it was kind of interesting about this was we would openly watch porn on DVDs on a big screen. So picture like five or six witnesses, you know, aging ages vary from 15 to 25. Drinking alcohol and watching porn, and then waking up the next day and going out in ministry. And so at this point in my life, I started to realize that most people were just kind of like living a double life, and it was just kind of like it wasn't really truth to anybody. You kind of just did what you wanted, and I don't remember many people over there. Taking there was a couple people we made fun of that were always on the assembly parts. Didn't have any friends and that were like pioneering and stuff in their teen years. This is kind of how I grew up in California, which is kind of like California is kind of notorious for having like a lot of spiritual problems, I guess, and people just kind of doing what they want. Um, and I remember it was interesting was like we'd watch porn and rate our movies, drink alcohol underage, but then when I invited a friend over from work, I literally got lectured by those same people who watch porn, drinking alcohol, about how I need to be careful about my association, and it was just so silly to me because it was just all a bunch of posturing, and so I don't know, and so those guys ended up moving away, and so I went back with my parents and I started playing the bass guitar a lot, and I got a job in the restaurant business in Napa, and I was making good money, in the restaurant business, and I bought a car and was playing bass guitar and I was messing around with some band stuff and like that, and then I had some friends up in Seattle. Uh, Want to start a band up there. And so I was like, yeah, I want to get out of here. Napa's stupid, anyways. And so I moved to Seattle. Okay. And I had my cards transferred. I wasn't anything special when I transferred up there. Maybe a publisher with some basic information, nothing special like pioneering. And I think I went to the Starlit congregation up in Federal Way, and so we started a band up there, and we started that band with the idea of not missing meetings, and uh, trying to keep it more casual. We just wanted to have a couple shows and things like that. And it's kind of funny, like our first concerts we were doing were actually at witness parties. And I'll put a link to like one of my music videos. You'll see it. It was post-hardcore anger music, and all five of us were witnesses. One of us wasn't baptized, but all five of us were raised witnesses. And we're doing pretty much post-hardcore music. And we all listened to it, and most people of that age did too. So screaming like, "Rawr, rawr," that kind of music. And uh, we started doing shows with witnesses first, at different witness parties up in the Seattle area. And then we started getting gigs, and we started getting really, really popular. And we wanted to dress our hair special, for shows, as best we could. And I remember just like my drummer getting really ragged on at the Kingdom Hall by a bunch of people, like, you can't spike your hair, it's worldly, and all this kind of crap. And that was kind of like our trigger. Like, we kind of just like didn't really want to do anything with them. And so I just stopped going to meetings. And we played a lot of video games. We played Final Fantasy 11 at the time, and Uh, Speaking of video games and spiritism and violent video games was always a part of my life, my entire life as a witness. And every witness kid played it. You know, I was really, really good at GoldenEye and things like that. I remember being at the meeting and like a ministerial servant's son. But no, he was a ministerial servant of an elder. He gave like the public talk, and after we shook his hand about the public talk, he's like, "Hey, bro, you got to come over for a Halo party." So that was more hypocrisy I saw. It was like you just like got off stage for an hour, you know, preaching about Jehovah, and then you want to go have a Halo party, you know. And it was just interesting, you know. And so we were in the band, and we had a lot of gigs. We got really popular really fast. Um, Long story short, both my guitarists and beginning disfellowshipped for having sex. I believe they didn't really tell me what they did, but that's something I assume. And just different things like that. And I rationalized to stay in the band and not worry about leaving because it was my job. And you know how witnesses like to justify a job with disfellowship people if their income is okay. And so what happened was my mom came up and she really guilted me because I had like black hair and I think some blonde streaks in there too. And it was just obviously very worldly. I wasn't going to meetings and she really guilted me. And I felt like shit because I was like, man, I'm such a terrible son. I should, you know, I don't believe in it anymore, but I should at least support my mother. So I started going to meetings again. And so I moved out of the apartment with my bandmates and moved in with my sister who lived up there, tried to fix my spirituality. A couple financial things happened, and I went down the Napa to make some money in the restaurant business real quick before I went on tour because our band got signed by an indie label. And so they were supposed to come over and uh, you know, give us a bunch of equipment. We were supposed to go to Houston, Texas, and then tour with a band called Scary Kids, Scaring Kids, and going up to New York, then come back to Houston, and then I believe go to LA and open up for a band called Atreyu, which was one of our favorite bands. And so I remember, you know, in the band scene, I remember like my drummer getting a blowjob in the bathroom by some groupie, and I remember looking at Eric and saying, like looking back at his face in the eyes, we kind of realized that we were both worldly at that point. I remember just like realizing that, and I remember meeting people who used to be ex-witnesses when I was in the band scene too, which was interesting to me. And but throughout this whole thing, I was kind of like, I didn't believe that anybody was serving God fully, but I still believed that you're still fully indoctrinated, even though you're in the world, you know. And I didn't really leave the band until they started getting involved in drugs, and that's really what offended me. It wasn't the fornication; I didn't give two craps about that. It wasn't, you know, partying and the alcohol. It was them getting involved in marijuana at the time, which is idiotic to me now as an adult man. But what happened was I got guilty to my mother, and I ended up leaving the band. I left the contract, left everything, and I broke up the band, and they had to go their separate ways. I think many of them still hold animosity towards me over this. It was a very confusing time. I think it was confusing for them as well. I mean, all five of us were cult members. They all left, and I went back down to California, and I was just working and playing video games, and kind of going to meetings, but not. I didn't. My cards were still in Washington, and I told the elders in California that I wasn't really going to do anything. And I worked there for a year, made save some money, and I had some friends in Oregon. They're like, "Hey, bro, you got to come up here." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." So I moved to Oregon, and then up there, I started going to meetings. I had a roommate that was auxiliary pioneering, and he was going by himself. And I felt really, really guilty that he was going by himself. And so I was like, "I'll go ride with them. You know, I'll go out in service. I don't want to talk to nobody." But he ended up, you know, kind of encouraging me to go to meetings again, and like the elders in that congregation were real encouraging about my answers because I was able to answer in the Revelation book and just have general intellect that you know, is usually lacking in the Kingdom Hall. Uh, and so I kind of liked that attention, and like the elders, like I didn't have my cards there. I wasn't even a member in the Kingdom Hall. I was there for a year and a half, and the elders had me over for dinner with the CEO, and like they were like promoting me, and I'm like, I'm not even a member in the Kingdom Hall. And I remember talking to like the coordinator, and I was like, you don't even know if I'm baptized. And he's like, well, I like to think you're baptized. It was just like a very, I don't know, like, is that like a liberal congregation in Oregon? I don't know what it was. But it was just like, it wasn't ran like anything I ever saw in the Kingdom Hall. And, anyways, my friend's dad came up here and really, really guilted me about, because I was taking my health very seriously at the time. And he's like, well, you're doing all this for your health, but you're not doing anything for Jehovah. And that really tore me in half. And so I ended up moving to Tennessee. And um, to fix my spirituality. So I moved to Tennessee at 24 years of age. I went to that congregation, and those elders were like, no, you have to have his cards here. We have to find this kind of stuff. And so they kept talking to all these different elders. And eventually, my Napa elder body created all new cards and sent it over to Tennessee. And I think I got like a godsend like that because all my judicial committee cards were missing and gone. And I think they're still in Washington, if they're if it even exists at all. And so I kind of had a clean slate in Tennessee. But the elders were like, well, is there anything we can help you with? And I remember I told them, I was just like, well, I think if I was in the world and I wasn't under the influence of, Jehovah, I would be bisexual. I told them that, and their faces went pale white, like like I just told them like I fought kids or something, And I'm like, okay, and so they're like, oh, okay. Well, you have to understand that certain precautions need to be done when I'm with that. And I was thinking like, hey, don't share beds with the guys was what they were talking about, but they literally put restrictions on me that I couldn't be with another man or a woman, like out in service. Like I couldn't be out in service with another brother. I wasn't allowed to go and hang out, go to movies with just one other person. That would be considered wrong in their eyes. And so when you're gay in the Kingdom Hall, you get treated like you're like a pedophile essentially. And so I was kind of upset about that. But then I think this was in 2008, which was Keep on Seeking God's Kingdom regional convention, and this was the one about the birds of prey, and I was feeling real depressed and things like that. And so I was thinking to myself, hey, if I can follow a vegan lifestyle, if I can follow an organic lifestyle, and I can do all this stuff perfectly, imagine what I can do with Jehovah's help. And so like I guilted myself into regular pioneering, and I wanted the regular pioneer, and so after the regional convention, I talked to the elders, and I told them that hey, I wanted to start pioneering, and then like they rejected my auxiliary pioneer slip. Um, 3 months in a row, and so I wasn't able to regular pioneer, and I wanted to because I wanted to go to pioneer school that year, and so that never happened. And so I started getting really, really anxious about why I wasn't being left in. I was thinking maybe because I didn't confess my sins or something, Holy Spirit was holding me back. And so as a witness, you kind of have like this paranoia about a lot of different things. Uh, and so I like was reading a bunch of Watchtower articles, and I read about rebaptism and all this nonsense, and then like I brought it to one of the elders, and I was like, this is my problem, this is why you guys are not approving me, is because I don't have the Holy Spirit, because I got baptized because I was having sex when I got baptized, which I was. And so I didn't really repent for my sins, so I wasn't really baptized, and this is why Jehovah's rejecting me from this kind of stuff. This is the kind of like piece together paranoia that a witness can go through. uh, and so he assured me that that wasn't the case, but by then, because of the mistreatment I got from the elders, I already had full blown anxiety, panic attacks at this point, because that's how panic attacks work. You learn them, and you learn anxiety. You learn to be anxious, which is interesting because you can unlearn it, which I'll talk about later. And eventually, but I got 70 hours a month without the title, and I literally raised their average of 3 hours. Um, I started getting 70 hours a month in July, and they did not approve me to auxiliary pioneer until January, and then they allowed me to be a regular pioneer starting in February of 2009. And but by then I already had a lot of mental problems. I had full on general anxiety disorder. I was very OCD. I started developing agoraphobia. I was at the Kingdom Hall, and I wasn't able to sit next to people. If they get too close to me, I'd be like freaking out. And I remember finding relief going behind the literature counter and serving there, away from people, because I'd have visions in my mind about like strangling kids and being all this weird stuff, which is these are all sensations that anxiety can cause, especially in men when you're mixing testosterone with, and different um, neurotransmitters. It can cause very aggressive behaviors in your minds, and that can make you freak out. And so I tried to avoid children, and I was really nervous around a lot of different things. And within 6 months, I was reaching the point of being suicidal while regular pioneering, too, by the way. And so they had an assembly part talking about going to doctors, and so I went to a doctor, and not a psychologist, of course, not a psychiatrist or any kind of medical health professional, but just a regular family doctor, and he gave me Celexa, and that kind of like made me into a zombie, but it didn't really solve my problems. And so within 3 or 4 months, I kind of realized that I had um, I had a terminal illness. That's what I was thinking in my mind, and eventually I wasn't going to be able to control myself. I was going to kill myself eventually, and because when I was going in my full suicidal thoughts and suicidal mode, it was like an exterior force entering into your mind and taking over your mind and making you do stuff that you don't want to do. And it's very hard to describe. Um, I will talk more about my anxiety in a separate video. But I had anxiety, major depression. I was diagnosed with both these kind of things. Um, the doctor was trying to get me to go to talk therapy, but I refused. And he was even going to do one with the Christian one, but I still didn't go. Um, it's just a big stigma to talk about medical professionals, in the witness community. And I was on Facebook, complaining about how dark my life was and how I thought my mind. And like the elders brought me in the back room and said, "We want to consider you for being a ministerial servant, but there's one thing we need to work on. You're being too negative all the time, and people say you speak negatively of all things." And I posted on Facebook, I said, "Well, the brothers told me I speak too negatively. I guess that means I need to keep my mouth shut, because all I can say right now is negative thoughts, because my mind is so dark right now and I just feel so bad." And well, anyways, this got back to one of the elders, and instead of them, contacting me, to try to figure out how to help me, you know, uh, I got more counsel about being negative and saying now this is going to hold you back from me being a ministerial servant, and and so they're like, elders are on Facebook really just to police. They're not on there to be your friend. So if you have an elder and you're watching this and you're a JW, of an elder friend, they're spying on you. There's always like one elder that's on the elder body that's on the social media that's just spying. That's pretty much what they do. They're just there to troll. And so I actually got contacted from an elder that I knew in Napa way back in the day, and he recommended a therapy program called the Linden Method, which he used, which I highly recommend, and I'll make a video about the Linden Method. Well, anyways, long story short, with the Linden Method, I was able to cure my anxiety and cure my depression with a proper therapy program. Um, and that's what I did. And so I did fix that. And then I went to Pioneer School with my brother, and this is in 2010. And my mother went the year before. And so I was pioneering with my mom, my brother, and my sister-in-law. So the four of us really went out by ourselves a lot because the congregation didn't really have a lot of support. And so we did that. So I was pioneering in English at that time. I got out of pioneer school and I was like, this is stupid. I'm tired of talking to English people because no one's interested in listening to what I have to say. And so I switched to Spanish. And so I switched to Spanish, and the brothers were like, "Oh, you don't want to go there yet. You got to become a ministerial servant first." I was like, "Well, we just had the Watchtower article that talks about, Holy Spirit appointing the brothers. So it doesn't matter what congregation I'm in, because Jehovah is going to make the decision, not these people." It's crazy shit you believe, and so I literally thought that, so I switched to Spanish anyways, and I was able to remain a regular pioneer. But then the elders in that congregation was like, "Oh, you got to get to know us first, and then we'll talk about that kind of stuff." And I was like, "Well, fuck." Everyone tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. And there was always elders trying to warn me about certain things. I didn't know all these rules because my dad was not an elder. Other people knew these rules and the jargon and what you're supposed to do. When your father's an elder, you have so much more advantage of how to go up in the ladder because you just know how to work it. And if you don't have any of those connections, you literally are at the mercy of other people who care about you, and they may or may not tell you how to get promoted in the political game. And so I switched to Spanish, and then I got really good friends with a brother who was also pioneer in Spanish, and he was really, really good at the pioneer at the witness ladder because his dad was an elder. He was well trained. He was ministerial servant, regular pioneer, and he was on his way up. And he knew everybody. I'm sure he was an ENFJ, and he knew everybody. And got me friends with the circuit overseer, and we would go to the circuit overseer, the regional convention, like on Wednesday, and help set up. And I got to know all the administrator and all that kind of stuff. And we go jogging every morning with the circuit overseer. And then the circuit overseer was having him move to Sevierville Spanish. So I asked him, hey, should I go to Sevierville Spanish too? And he's like, well, if you think you can progress there, go ahead. And so I went there, and then the Sevierville Spanish was like, didn't really give two craps about me because all I was a pioneer that was useless to them. They wanted a ministerial servant, so I couldn't give me in my talks I wanted. Or they weren't really using me, so I kind of felt like disrespected, like, hey, I'm moving out to this podunk congregation in the middle of nowhere, and nothing's really happening. Um, that being said, it was a real troubled congregation. There was a pedophilia scandal in that congregation where a ministerial servant raped like a 6-year-old, and her father literally walked in on him screwing her, and like he had blood all over his hands and stuff like that. He ended up going to prison, and so that kind of, you as a witness, you're kind of thinking like, oh well, they're turning him over to the officials and things are done right. But there was still a lot of animosity in the congregation. There's still a huge split, and witnesses are fucking crazy. And some people were insinuating that it was because the father allowed his daughter to dress too adult like, and that's why that happened to her. And so it's his fault, and it's his mother's fault because they allowed their daughter. Now granted, in the Spanish community, in my opinion, they do let their daughters wear high heels way too young, in my opinion. Cultural thing, whatever, sue me. I don't like seeing 9-year-olds wearing heels and wearing lipstick. I don't, sorry. It's totally inappropriate. But maybe I'm a little too conservative, I don't know. But and so there was a lot of issues in that congregation. And so when I got there, um, the elder that was there for like 4 years, he split. He took off. He went to some easier hall, and I was made a ministerial servant, and then he bounced. And well, let me get that straight. Okay, first of all, I also saved up. I had like 12 grand saved up as a pioneer. That's a lot of money, and I was planning on moving to Peru because I was tired of learning Spanish in the States. And the elders told me not to go to Peru yet, to become a ministerial servant first. And so I ended up staying. Now, granted, I didn't have a job, and I was still commuting to Sevierville, and so I spent a lot of that money pioneering and not working, and supporting the congregation, and I was made a ministerial servant, and this was probably in 2011, and no, it was in 2012. I'm sorry, 2012, right when I got back from Mexico. In 2012, in January 2013, actually, I take that back. January 2013, I was made a ministerial servant, and the coordinator left, and then there was this young elder that moved in. It was 27. That was the first time I ever had an elder younger than me, and I think I was 28 at the time. And he was batshit crazy, and he was trying to be a circuit overseer, and so he moved to that congregation because he just wanted to have the coordinator position. And so they promoted a ministerial servant that had no business being an elder. Didn't have any of the qualifications, speaking ability, teaching ability, or any kind of like shepherding skills whatsoever. But that elder wanted to get out, and so he needed to have the help. And so they made him an elder, and then they brought in the young kid who was 27, and then another person from Florida was there as an elder. And so at that time, it was me as a ministerial servant and two other ministerial servants. So three ministerial servants and three elders was in that congregation, and I only had one rule with them. I only wanted to give one talk per meeting, because I would get Spanish mixed up if it was two talks in meetings. And that elder was crazy and really, really tried to cause divisions and my friendships because he was jealous that I had really two close pioneer friends. And he did some really, really terrible, screwed up things to my friend. Uh, and this is when the new Bible was coming out. That was in 2013. And he screwed up something like that. And so he was all pissy about that. And so he just took off and went back to Bethel, him and his wife. And he wanted to make sure he had like 2 years of being a coordinator on his resume or whatever. I don't even know how this stuff even works, but supposedly that was important. And so he never allowed the elders to take him off the list as a coordinator, even though he was in Bethel. And so he left, and there was um, two elders, a couple ministerial servants. He took off. The secretary was the coordinator as well. And so there's just all this crap drama all over the place. It was just a real crazy time, and it was just complete pandemonium the entire time. And my whole agenda was try to get out of the country. I went to Mexico on a missionary tour for a month, and I really liked being out of the country, and that's what I wanted to do. And well, anyways, the coordinator that replaced the crazy coordinator. Let me throw that out. I also got axed as a regular pioneer because I was 55 hours shy of my 840, and I got no message. No one talked to me beforehand. I had no one talk to me, and I just got the axe. And they claimed that they did, and nobody did. And I had elders in other congregations say, "You got to go to the circuit overseer. You got to do this." And I was like, "It doesn't matter. I lost it. I can't go to MTS now." That was my goal. I wanted to go to MTS, and so that happened. So I got axes, and it really devastated me. But I continued to get the hours anyways. And in 6 months, I got back on the list. Um, but I was not able to go to MTS, and I was just about 3 months away from the 2 year quota of both things needing to be done. And that coordinator took off. They got really close with the coordinator there, and he took off. And then they brought an emergency one, and then my friend that I was really close with, he became an elder. Within 3 months later, he was axed. Uh, and so it was like my whole world was devastated because I was really close with the elder coordinator. My best friend became an elder, then he was axed. And all this time I was dealing with the gay problem because you, as a witness, you're raised to think that you can pray it away and that it's a temporary thing, it's a spiritual weakness. And here I was, regular pioneering as a ministerial servant, applying to Bethel, all this kind of stuff, and doing everything you're supposed to be doing, and it just wasn't going away. So I was dealing with that. These people fell apart. The whole congregation was falling apart. Um, my roommate at the time too uh, ditched me and went out of the city because of rumors that we were gay, and which was not the case. He had a girlfriend, and he was straight, and I was completely respectful about that. And I know how to, be in the world, and pretend to be straight. I know how to do it. I've done my whole life. And so he took off, and so then I'm sitting there with no apartment, no place to go, and then there was like this one brother that's like, "Well, I got a room you can rent," and I'm like, "Okay," and I'm gonna try to say this as non-racist as possible, but he was like really Mexican, and like there was like chickens and crap running around, and cats and animals, and no AC, and just like real dirty, kind of like a rancho house in the middle of Tennessee. And I was very miserable there. I was still dealing with issues with being gay and not knowing what to do about it. Thinking I wasn't really gonna. It wasn't that I wanted to have sex. You want intimacy. In any kind of relationship. That's what people don't understand about it. It's like in most gay couples, it's more or less about having someone to cuddle with, having someone to kiss, someone to wake up next to. That's what the typical gay person wants, and that happens to be a man or two women or whatever, And so people are thinking like, oh, you guys are just depraved, just want to have weird sex all the damn time, and it's not really the case. It's not any different than any other relationship. And so, if anyone's ever worried about that, and so you crave intimacy, and so I was convinced that there were no good gay people on the planet, and I was going to convince myself by with some evidence, and so I went on Match.com. And I went on there and I searched for some people, and I found somebody who was a Christian gay person, which I thought was an oxymoron, the most idiotic thing I ever heard of. And I talked to him and I called him, which was like super daring at the time. As a ministerial servant, as a pioneer, I should never have done such a thing. And it was like totally, forbidden. And it was funny. I called him right after leaving the flea market where I had the JW. We had an office there where people can walk by, and the only people I ever talked to us were crazy or ASL. But so I called him and I talked to him for 9 hours, and it was the first time I ever was able to have an open discussion about being gay as a Christian, because there's no one you can talk to. That's the hardest thing about it in the Kingdom Hall. You can't talk to the elders. Remember, I got treated like a pedophile when I did, uh, and so there's no support group because it's a spiritual problem, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that means, hey, if you have these feelings, we need to get rid of your pioneer. We need to get rid of your ministerial servant, because we can't have a gay person having these feelings, because that's a sin, thought crime, And so it's a very scary time. You have no one to talk to about it, and so I finally had somebody after 30 years of my life to openly talk about it, and I've never done that before. I told my brother years earlier, but not to this extent of any kind of intimacy. And so, um, but at the end of the conversation, I told him that I didn't want to pursue anything further, and I'm going to continue my ministry, and to thank you, let's just be friends. And that's what we ended up doing. And so I went back and started fully immersing myself in there. I didn't have any relationship like that, and but the congregation wasn't getting any better. I didn't understand all this time invested in this really needy congregation, and we just kept getting new elders moving in and out, and the CEO just kept bringing people in and out, and it was a real chaotic mess. It was a real, just a clusterfuck of just dysfunction, just constant dysfunction. So if you picture yourself as a brother, there's a time when I was the only ministerial servant where I would be doing sound and microphones and stage, and probably attendant too. There'd be like one or two brothers that can do everything, because in the Spanish congregation you have to have your papers or you can't be used, and so that was a problem. Um, and so it was just a real confusing time, and I was just feeling really, really lonely one day, and I was flying back to California because I lost my job in Tennessee, and I needed to make money, so I was going to California to work for my brothers doing some roofing, and I got lonely, and so I called up the person I talked to on Match.com, and I ended up having conversations with him on a regular basis when I was in California on a daily basis, and he bought me a plane ticket to Ohio. And so I was in California for 2 months, and then he flew me to Ohio. And before I went there, I was like, okay, first of all, I'm not going to touch your penis. First, second of all, there's going to be no sex, no oral sex, none of this kind of stuff. I'm just going out there to hang out with you. And he agreed to all this kind of stuff. you know, um, what I really, what my plan was is I was going to test and see if I was really gay or not, because I was going to have a chance to make out with somebody, to kiss somebody, to see if there was any kind of romantic inclination or I feel grossed out by it. And I obviously naturally was not grossed out by it. It felt completely natural, completely normal, like I don't know, like a fish in water. Nothing confusing. It wasn't nothing weird. And it was just like, wow, this is just completely normal. And so I did end up, I don't know if this is too dirty for YouTube, but I did orgasm twice, without any kind of sexuality. So I felt really guilty about that. And that was just from just simple making out, which is just so how oppressed you are as a witness. And so after that, my father had a stroke while I was in Ohio, and I was getting harassed by his elders and his congregations about how evil I was. And I'm like, I'll be there in 2 days, and my father was in the hospital or something I can do anyways. And so I ended up flying back to Tennessee, and I got there, and my father was in a hospital, and so I stayed with him for a month and a half in the hospital. He didn't listen to me about natural health and naturopathy and Dr. Wallach and all that kind of stuff before that, but after that, he got him on board. I got him back on tip-top shape, got him back driving, got him, actually following, real science, of medical nutrition versus what allopathy wants to preach. They were trying to teach him how to use a cane and he could walk. It was just crazy to see how pathetic hospitals are and how pathetic allopathy is in general. Um, and so then that happened, and well, anyways, the guy in Ohio kept contacting me, and I'm trying not to say his name because I don't want to put people's name in there. I already said two names already. Hopefully, people don't catch on to what that means. And so I told him up there, I was just like, well, I can't have sex until I'm married, and a gay marriage was just legalized at that time, and he came back with the proposal, and I was like, what the heck, and like I told him, you don't even know who I am. This is the most idiotic thing I ever heard of, and but within a month, I agreed to it, and we ended up getting hitched. So I got hitched as a ministerial servant and as a regular pioneer, and he kept visiting while I was taking care of my parents there in Tennessee, and I got to have sex for the first time at age 31. You know, uh, and so we would have sex like in the hotel rooms and things like that, and that was that. And I had to take care of my parents, and then by December of that year, my dad had a stroke. The 8th September, and by December, my husband wanted to become a witness. And originally, the original agreement was I was just going to visit him a couple months out of the year, and I was going to be in Nicaragua, as a missionary. And it's kind of funny. He says I want to be a witness, and I was like, well, this is going to change everything in our future, because now we can be together. Because before it was going to be everything was secretive. Like he literally agreed to be with me in secret. You know, and I had no dating experience. I never dated anybody before that. I have absolutely no idea what I was doing. I was just in this marriage, and I was, at first I was thinking of ways to get out because he was a real jealous type and bothered me a lot with that, and didn't want me hanging out with other guy friends and all this other psycho stuff. And like, granted, we are friends now, and I do view him like a brother. But we were never meant to be in a romantic relationship, in my opinion. And so that's how that worked out. And so I got married, and then he started studying the Bible with me over Skype because he was out of state, obviously. And so he was a snowbird in Myrtle Beach, and so he would spend the winters in Myrtle Beach. And I told him if he wanted to get baptized, he needed to talk to the elders in that area. And so he went to the Kingdom Hall there, and I told him to look for the service overseer and talk to him. And I was going to have him get studied with by somebody there so he can get baptized there. And then, but that elder told me to move to Myrtle Beach. And I'm like, well, I don't have a job in Myrtle Beach. What do you want me to do? And so I contacted him, my husband, and like he's like, well, I can get you a job cleaning condos. I said, okay, whatever. So I moved to Myrtle Beach. Um, and so I told the elders in Myrtle Beach that I was going to move there, live with the person I was studying with. He had an extra bedroom for me. And it turns out he was also like my fifth cousin. And so we just told everybody we were cousins, like way, way down the line. Not nothing too incest here. Not that it really matters, but And so that was our excuse. He's like, "Who's my cousin?" You're like, "Oh, okay." No one ever questioned us, you know. Like, meanwhile, I was married to him, and so it was technically wasn't a lie. And technically, also, I put this point in: I never fornicated, you know. So I was married before any of that. So, which is just absurd, you know. It wasn't the fact that I thought gay marriage at the time was okay. It was just I thought it'd be better than not. And so, like, my views on gay marriage have completely revolutionized and changed since then. You know, now I realized how disrespectful that was to begin with. I was just taking advantage of a system that people have fought and died for, and blood, sweat, and tears over. Um, uh, so I moved to Myrtle Beach with the elders knowing, and I assumed everything was gonna be okay. And then my elders in Sevierville like had this bitch fit, and they started freaking out because of who I was moving in with, and like, hey, you can't do that. Who ever heard of someone moving in with someone you're studying with? I'm like, well, I have nowhere else to live. I don't have anybody there, and this is what the elders are telling me to do. And they're like, where in the Bible does it say you could ever do this kind of stuff? And like right in my mind, it popped up in Luke. I thought it was Holy Spirit trying to help me to defend my faith. Was and Jesus entered. He gave instructions to the his apostles to go into a place, knock on the door, and there is peace. Enter into their house, and stay there until you're done with your preaching work. So I said that scripture right there, and they're like, "Oh, you can't be twisting scriptures like that." It was kind of funny though. It's like in Dubtown, they mentioned about so we do what the governing body says and not what Jesus said. And so in that case, yes, they do what the governing body says and not what Jesus says. Although the governing body doesn't ever forbid this kind of stuff. In California, it was totally normal for people to rent a room in a big giant house with a bunch of worldly roommates, and nobody would say one thing. It just shows you that the cultures will change what's okay in the JW faith and what's not. So, anyways, I have a husband in Myrtle Beach, and uh, we were going through the questions with him. I was not a didn't have a letter of recommendation as a ministerial servant. I was not recommended as a pioneer, and so I didn't have any of that kind of stuff when I was in Myrtle Beach, which was frustrating to me. Well, kind of frustrating. It's like kind of I at that time I was burnt out, and I really didn't care. I was just really, really burnt out by then, and so in that congregation, I was kind of moving up. As soon as I walked in, I got that feeling, you know, like no one gets along, and this hall had a lot of issues. Like the elder body did not get along at all, and I kind of knew that when I first walked in. And ATPs get intuitions like that, and well, anyways, I ended up getting really popular there, and Matt, and him and I were, we were really popular. We got to do like demonstrations on stage, you know, husband and husband, no problem. You know, uh, I ended up auxiliary pioneering with him. You know, we both got an auxiliary pioneer list because I was like, you don't want to be a regular pioneer. It's not worth it because you go to pioneer school, but you get the same treatment as an auxiliary pioneer with the circuit overseer anyway. So we'll get the 70 hours, but you'll stay auxiliary pioneer. And he agreed with that. A little side note, while I studied with him, I knew that he didn't believe any of what I was teaching him. He would argue with me nonstop about different doctrine. And he later on told me, yes, I knew I was joining the cult, but I was joining the cult for you. Um, and so it was an interesting time. I don't know if it was a lot of the conflict came from the religion itself. It was irritating to be in a marriage with another witness because it was kind of like you go to meetings and you get henpecked, and then you get home and you're getting henpecked too. So if that makes any sense to people, in your comments about being married as a witness, you're kind of getting henpecked all the time to be kept in line, either by your husband or wife or whatever. And then you go into Kingdom Hall, you're getting henpecked. You got the elders henpecking you, so you're just constantly being henpecked to get in line as a witness. And so, anyways, we auxiliary pioneered together for about 2 years. We got special treatment from the circuit overseer because of his bright ideas about reaching certain areas where we weren't able to go into because it was private property. And so we were really well respected in the congregation. We had lots of friends. Um, I don't know, you know, we visited people in the hospital. It was an interesting time. You know, we had a lot of conflict, a lot of arguments, and so it was a very confusing time for me because I was in a marriage that I wasn't happy in, but then I was happier than what I was when I wasn't married, if that makes any sense. and and during that time, I got my degree online. So I got my bachelor's degree in education, and because I didn't have any financial issues. My husband had pension plan and all this other stuff and money, so that kind of worked out well for me. And so I was kind of kept, I guess, you could be a sugar baby or whatever. He was much older than me, but and I like older guys, so there's that. But and so we ended up moving to Mexico down there, and I kind of knew that I was kind of done for with the whole relationship, and I think he did too. And I told him, I was just like, listen, you've done so much nice things for me, and it really hurts me that I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to stay in this relationship anymore. And I told him like I was gonna see other people. If you wanted to get divorced, we could. If not, that's fine too. And at first he was, oh, I don't want to be ashamed, because he still had issues with gay marriage himself and being embarrassed up in Ohio in front of his family and all this other nonsense. And so that didn't happen right away. And so I ended up seeing some other people on the internet, and eventually I told him I was leaving, and that kind of made him freak out, and which is what ESFJs do. And so then, ESFJs are going to try to ruin your reputation and ruin your life and your future when you break up with them. And uh, he ended up telling my family about our relationship. Although my family called me up, and he's very eccentric, and so they're like, "Is this all this stuff true?" I was like, and I reflected the answer. I was like, "You know how he is. He's crazy. Not saying yes or no." And so I never admitted to anything. And then he had a copy of the marriage certificate up in Mexico, and then he snuck me into some meeting with an elder and showed it to him. And then at that point, I knew that my life as a JW, that I knew it at that point was over, because I wasn't going to go through judicial committee over this. There's no way I was going to get dragged through that crap like I did when I was 17. And and so I left and went to Europe. And when I was in Europe, I was by myself, and uh, away from the indoctrination, away from all this kind of stuff, and started piecing a lot of things together. Um, and when you visit different things, and like my congregation in Mexico was a need greater congregation. There was a lot of hypocrisy in that congregation that really, really bothered me. People were literally on vacation down there. They're not really preaching. So, like, you think about like the English territory, and pretty much every Latin American country is really about being on the beach, and you're in a vacation area. So most people down there, they don't really. I mean, you had people that were made ministerial servants, before their 5 year probation was up, because their dad was an elder, and he wasn't even a regular pioneer with no job. And so he wasn't just doing nothing but watching Netflix. So you go to these need greater areas down in Mexico, for instance, and the people are just like watching Netflix all day and drinking margaritas. And they're like, oh, and then they put them on stage at these assemblies where they brag about, we're making so many sacrifices for Jehovah. We're just down here, and it's just like the best life ever, and it was just kind of crazy. And so, anyway, so I had to go to Europe, and my original plan. This was my plan. I was gonna leave the faith for 2 years, then come back and be treated like someone who's inactive, and so you can sidestep a judicial committee that way, just so you know. And so if you come back inactive from a couple of years time, you don't have to go through judicial committee, and they just like go through, are you living this lifestyle? And you say no, and then you just spend 6 months proving yourself, and you're fine with that. And so I went to Europe alone, and got away from the indoctrinations. I visited Egypt. I visited Israel, Jordan, Rome, and a lot of different European places. And I had a lot of fun down over there. I ended up being with an elder in Budapest. And granted, when I had sex with him, I didn't. I didn't think he was still serving as a witness. So at the time, I never would have done that if I would have known. But I met him at a Budapest spa called Rudolph Spa, and this one section is for men only, and it's an American. I mean, I don't in Europe. I guess this is okay, but everyone's half naked, and most people in there are gay, and it's just like not a place you would think you would ever find an elder. And so we kind of met, and he spoke English, which was nice and exciting, things like that. And so, and I was feeling horny, and so I kind of like violated him, and but he didn't seem to mind. And so like the next morning, I woke up at his apartment, and I'm going through his shit. I'm like, in his living room, I'm like, dude, you still have all these books? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to a meeting right now. And I'm like, what? And so like he had all the literature like in Hungarian, all the witness literature, and I was like, I didn't realize you still went to meetings, And then like 2 weeks later, he's telling me, oh, I'm going to go to the elders and confess. So he gets himself this fellowship, and I'm like, okay, sorry, that's like, and they were calling me like I'm a Moabite woman and all this other crap, and I ruined his life and all this kind of stuff. And so he is, I think he's like, uh, uh, what is it? Pomey, I guess is what you call it, physically out but mentally in. Like he still believes it's the truth, but he's living like the gay lifestyle. And he was married to a woman which he says he loved, but I mean, I don't really go for the whole bisexual thing. It's like if you're truly bisexual, you're gonna go with the easier life, and the easier life is straight. Okay, and so I don't buy that. I think that's just people who are insecure. They just say that kind of stuff. But whatever, that's just my opinion on that kind of stuff because women do absolutely nothing for me. Like, nothing. They're just totally my friend. I have no desire to be sexual with any woman, nor do I find breasts, ass, lips, anything a woman has. I don't find it attractive one bit. You know. And I love women, we're good friends. And I love talking with them, being friends with them, but that's about it. So, well, anyways, and so I went going to like the regional convention up in Frankfurt, Germany, to make my mom happy, and I didn't have my badge with me, and I got interrogated every morning. It was so funny. I sent a message to Kevin McFree, Dubtown, and talked about. How I got interrogated every morning. They went through my lunch bag because I didn't have a badge, but I was wearing dress clothes. I was clearly American, and it was an English assembly, English and German, and every morning I got interrogated for 3 days straight. And those were kind of like little wake up calls to me. And it's just like I had a beard, and so that was kind of thing. But there was like 20% of Germans had beards from what I saw. So it wasn't that big of a deal there. I had it trimly cut, neat, and things like that. And but I ended up going back to the states to help my parents drive home from Washington back down to California, and I went to their circuit assembly eventually. This is a month after their regional convention, but I went to their circuit assembly, and I got accosted by an elder there that I haven't spoken with in 12 years, telling me, what are you doing here? You have a husband, you're all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, he caught me way off guard. And I was like, well, hey, Tony, I'm here alone. If I had a husband, don't you think he would be here with me? And I, try to play it off, and I just like laughed at him, and like he was shaking, like Phineas, like I think he's an ISFJ, like vengeful, Torquemada type stuff. And so I went home because I had to go to work that night. I work on the internet, by the way, and I went home, and they started contacting like my family and all this other crap, and they're trying to get me to go see the elders. And I told my family I'm not going to I'm not going to talk to them. I don't owe them anything. I'm not going to do that. I'm not admitting to anything. If I am married, it's none of your guys' business. It's not their business. It's not your business. You know, any kind of things that I had with other people is essentially none of your business. You know, and but it was just weird because I was getting witch hunted in California by people I didn't know, and they were talking to my elders in Mexico somehow. So the Mexican elders were looking for me, you know. And then I got an email from elders in Tennessee who I also didn't speak to for like 8 years. This is the Tennessee English elders, and they're asking me, "Oh, we heard that you left and you're now a homosexual and all this other stuff." So all this gossip was going on. I was getting witch hunted, and so I met somebody on Match, and I moved to Nebraska, uh, and not Match, but OK Cupid, and it was process of divorce and things like that with the ex, and so when I was in Nebraska and all this witch hunting was going on, these weird emails, all this kind of stuff, this is when I was starting to realize that I'm like, why this place is? Why does it feel like I'm in a cult? You know, and that's when I started to. I looked up, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna look at some apostate stuff, which I don't even know what even motivated me to do that. And the first person I saw I was XJW Analyzer, and I was going through the list of different XJW stuff, and I wanted to pick something that was real poppy and simple. And I think it was the video about um, it was the video about the child's book, my book of Bible stories, and all the graphic pictures in witness literature, which I thought was kind of petty of John to complain about that kind of stuff at first, but it is a good point. There is a lot of blood. Why are we reading this the children's book? And so that was kind of like a rollover. And then like I watched some of the stuff about the elders book, and then it was like, okay, this is cute, you know. And then like I found JT and the critical thinker and Lady C and all that kind of stuff, and then I eventually found Lloyd Evans, and it wasn't until I went on jwfacts.com, which was the final one to look at, because that was like, don't go to jwfacts.com. That was the evil website, you know? And I went to it, and I stumbled across the UN thing, and I was like, bam! I'm like, the UN connection with a Guardian article. You know, this is the Guardian article, and talking about the UN and USA. I mean, there's no reason, there's no incentive for the Guardian to make this up. I have a lot of issues with journalism and clickbait, but Jehovah's Witnesses are not clickbait. We're not that. They're not that. I shouldn't say we. They are not that important, and no one really gives a shit about them. And once you leave, you kind of realize how little people care about Jehovah's Witnesses, and it is kind of interesting. And so that kind of like bam in my head was the revelation came up in my head. Get out from among her unless you want to share in her sins. And so I was like, well, if they're part of the UN, I can't be with them because that's sharing with their sins according to the scriptures. Because I would still consider myself a Christian at this time. You know, I didn't really fully believe that at this point the genocide. I think at that point I thought a lot of people were going to survive a lot more than most witnesses thought. A lot of this came from my husband's viewpoint of Christianity, and actually he's from more of evangelical Church of Christ, Church of God type things. In Methodist, he's been in a lot of different religions, and literally, as a witness who has been a witness my entire life, actually learning finally about what grace was, and the message of Christianity itself is forgiving his sins. But witnesses don't really teach about forgiveness of sins. It's about earning salvation versus a bailout of something that's free. And so it was kind of a new concept, and he kind of radically changed my mindset on how I viewed people and who was going to die and who wasn't. And now, granted, I'm agnostic now, or atheist, whatever you want to call it. I don't have an answer. I don't know if there is a God. I don't believe in the Bible anymore. I held on to my Bible beliefs for a while until I saw the interview of Dr. Robert Price with Lloyd Evans, and that kind of put me on a educational downslope of reading about how faulty, even Kenny. It's really hard to prove that Christ even exists. There's one of I think there was somebody like Christ that existed. My voice is going to throw. I've been talking for an hour and 24 minutes. Sorry. Someone like Christ does exist, or did exist, but is there any kind of concrete evidence that he was the Son of God or any kind of divine? No. No. So there's too many flaws in the writings, and so at this point, that's the route I'm going. I still have Christian friends. That's fine. I'm divorced now, but I'm still friends. I did forgive him. He did apologize for ruining my life essentially, but because of him, I'm awake now, and so he actually saved my life. And so, yeah, granted, outing me out to my family is a very, very no-no in the gay community to ever, snitch on somebody who's closeted because we all, I mean, even worldly gay people have horror stories too. It's not just witnesses. And so, like many people have said, just like coming out twice, and being a gay Jehovah's Witness, let me just talk about that for a second, is you're told misinformation that you can fix it. And so you're hopeful. And so you bypass a lot of things in life because you're trying to you're going to outgrow it. That's literally what the literature tells you is going to happen. It's a phase, and it's not a phase. And so any young person, going through this kind of stuff, accept the cross you were born to bear. Yeah, it is a rough life being gay, and just because you're out of the witness faith or still in it, it doesn't mean you're going to be accepted in liberal or conservative circles. Not every, there's people just don't like gay people. It's just something you have to accept. Then there's people like Lloyd Evans, for instance, who I met and didn't have an ounce of homophobia, and it was quite amazing, um, about that. And so there are a lot of good people out there. I shouldn't say good because even people who are homophobic, I don't have any. I don't know if my Jehovah's Witness upbringing, but I don't have any animosity towards them, and everyone has a right to have their viewpoint on that. I am a libertarian in that sense, and so um, that's kind of the gist of my story. Now I'm, currently dating somebody. I'm divorced, but uh, still friends. All that kind of stuff. I pioneered with them. It was an interesting time. If you ever think Holy Spirit has anything to do with anything, it's not true. I remember thinking that you gave talks with the help of God. Okay, when I was in a full blown marriage, full blown having gay sex on a regular basis, I was able to go on the stage and give my talks like nothing else was different. No change. Wasn't missing Holy Spirit. Either God approves it and the Holy Spirit was with me, or Holy Spirit doesn't exist and it was always my power to begin with. Okay, so whatever way you want to accept it as, there's that. And so ministry did not change. I was still able to do everything I wanted. People loved us in the congregation, and we literally got shout outs from the circuit overseer in Mexico about being so popular in the community down in Mexico. And they were talking to everybody in the area, but everyone knew who we were. Granted, he was an ESFJ, and ESFJs are gregarious people, and so no strangers and things like that. And so currently, I was shunned by my brother, and he was pretty much my best friend. I haven't spoke to him in over a year. Um, my mom sends me about one text message a month, and usually it's something judgmental about coming back to the cult. I've tried to talk to her, but it's like that. My sister still speaks with me, and she's always been really rebellious, and I don't think I'll ever be shunned fully by her. But other family members, they beg me not to tell my father due to health concerns, but he's healthy. But my mother really never respected his headship to begin with. Um, it kind of always did her own thing, and so I don't know what my dad knows. I don't know if he even knows I'm inactive or what. We didn't really have that good of a relationship to begin with. Outside of golf and watching golf, that was pretty much our thing. Um, all of my friends, don't talk to me. Um, it's interesting to have relationships with worldly people, and you try to explain this stuff to people, and there's really no one that really understands what it's like to grow up as a witness, let alone as a gay witness. All this kind of stuff just kind of flew by me. Most people find this very, very shocking, sharing a bed with a pedophile, dealing with elders and elders' sons, and It's been an interesting life. Uh, and some messages for everybody. Never allow your suffering to go to waste. Yeah, you suffered in the Jehovah's Witness faith, but with that suffering, you can learn and be a better person, and you can move on forward. And there is that, and so it's kind of funny. There's a lot of good people out there, and there's a lot more good people in the world than there is in the witness faith. And the extra content is fun. It's good to know and get that basis down, but there's only so much research you need to do before everything falls apart. I only got through halfway through Crisis of Conscience because I was just like, this is all I need to know. Other books, I read How to Escape the Watchtower, but by then I was already kind of gone anyways. Um, you need to read self-help books, things like that, and improve yourself. I'm really into Jungian depth psychology, as everyone tells from my channel, and I think I'm gonna cut it off here. I'll talk about other. I'll rewatch this and I'll make smaller videos, maybe to add a little snippets in here and that. So there is no Holy Spirit guiding things. It's a man-made organization filled with human beings that run it like a human organization. Uh, as well as they're able to function, it's quite shocking. It wasn't easy growing up gay because everybody hates you in the congregation, and you have to listen to like watchtower comments. They raise your hands and they're like, I talk about how disgusting we are and how we're depraved and evil people, and I even believed it myself. And so there's a lot of self hatred in that sense. Uh, as you can tell, I'm a much happier person now. Granted, I am shunned by my family, but I don't want to be around cult members anyways. It's just like I don't get why people want to be around their family so bad. It's just like they're in a cult. Why would you want to talk to cult members? It's just like once you wake up and the scales fall off your eyes, you're just like these people are fucking weird. There's so many other cool people out there, and so I mean, travel. There's just a lot to do in this world. You've already wasted enough time, in religion to begin with, and so, anyways, that's my story. Uh, I hope it's interesting, people. Sorry, it's an hour and a half.